So today we're going to talk about how you can easily or more easily organize your Google Classroom with a nice numbering system. So first, let's get some context here. Have you heard a student say something like this? I couldn't find the assignment on Google Classroom. For real. If you haven't heard this, you're lucky. And I want you to teach me how to organize yourself and organize your students. The frustration is that, like, when we hear that, what we're going to say are things like, everything a student could possibly want is on Google Classroom. How could they not find it? It's all there. I've listed everything. Everything is there. I'm very frustrated. And then you go to your happy place as the student continues to explain that they couldn't find it. So the frustration, is that sometimes when we communicate to our students, our communication verbally is good, but our perhaps follow-up not so good. So for example, let's say your assignment, you told the students, and it was on the agenda, do the conflict paragraph homework, and like literally enter anything that you would have said in that class, like enter lesson 2 assignment. So like obviously it seems easy enough. You've said it, you've written it, there's no way that they could there's no way that they could have a problem. So then when a student logs into Google Classroom, what do they see? Well, I mean, they see that. They see conflict paragraph, then they see conflict paragraph due date, feedback, and then they also see conflict paragraph rewrite. Now, a student that is paying attention could say like, oh, look at these due dates. I should probably look at the due dates here. But if they couldn't even tell the difference between these three, why would you expect them to look at the due dates? So we need to keep in mind that this is not a you problem necessarily. This is a system problem, meaning like this is not just like, let me rephrase that. It's frustrating. It takes up time, it takes up energy, because now you need to re-explain where it's at. Now you need to wait for the assignment, or you could really come off as a big fat jerk and be like, well, no, you didn't do it, so you can never show me what you're capable of doing. Not great, right? So like if it's an assignment that you need to see, then the student should be given the opportunity to demonstrate what they can do. So this was my classroom experience, where students would say, oh, I couldn't find the assignment, and then I would go there and be like, well, can't you see it? It's right there, or maybe there, or maybe there. So what I had to keep reminding myself was that, like, the students are just that. They are not full-fledged adults. For all intents and purposes, some of the students that we have are children, literal children. And so they are developing organizational strategies, and we can't expect them to have all of these strategies down and ready to go. That they're in a time in their life where they are developing these skills so that they can be successful beyond high school. They're practicing in high school. So they're developing those strategies. The other thing too is that, like, maybe they've got a strategy down for one class, but they have to try to keep up with multiple classes. So like it's asking a lot, right? And I'm not going to pretend that I was a good student in organization. You should have seen my folders. They were awful. So we need to be aware that the students that are our clients, if we want to use that language, which I hate, but our students are developing skills, and so we need to meet them where they're at, right? This is why that I'm going to introduce to you, for some of you, some of you it might be a review, but like try a numbering system with your Google Classroom. So Alice Keeler, if you know who Alice Keeler is, you know that she's like a god amongst men, right? So she does a lot of stuff, and this is her. Look at her. Yes, I love you, Alice Keeler. But she is a technology guru, and what she has, I read an article a few years ago about her numbering assignments system, or just numbering in general in Google Classroom. So that way it can minimize this confusion on the part of the students and frustration on the part of the teachers. So instead of perhaps that confusing classroom where it was conflict this, conflict this, conflict this, now the student can say, oh, there are multiple things that have conflict in the name. However, I can look to specific numbers now, right? So I can say, oh, 048 or 045, what am I working on? It's much more organized, perhaps, than, or at least for the students, it's easier to maneuver because they're just looking for numbers. Now, I did my numbering system. So while I did a numerical system where I just used numbers and I started with 001 and then just went up, there are other different systems that you could use, however, whatever suits your needs, right? So like in a math class, you have units, right? So like, for example, unit 2 could be polynomial arithmetic. So the first one is 2.1, and that's a lesson, right? Intro to polynomials. 2.1.1 then could be like the lesson 1 homework. Then you could have lesson 2.1.2 if you gave feedback. I don't know if you wanted to give feedback, whatever. So you could like, and then unit 3, like however you keep going, unit 3, you start everything with a 3 then. So it would be 3.1 would be your first lesson, 3.1.1 could be your homework, etc. So just in general, keeping like a numerical system so that students could follow along. Now, perhaps you don't have units that are listed like that numerically, and instead you're kind of working on multiple things at a time. Perhaps you're doing like more project-based learning, and there's multiple projects happening at the same time. Instead, you could still have units separated, but you could, the numbers that you're using kind of like jump all over the place. So perhaps in an art class, your first lesson or your first unit is about developing artistic ideas. You've got this 001, so talking about the 5 forms of developing art, like how do you brainstorm, etc. Then you talk about choosing a medium, which is 002. And then in the midst of talking about this medium or what media you would use, then perhaps you give them an ed puzzle, like for a homework as like ethics, dipping into unit 2, which is ethical practices in art. But then you're still working in the development of artistic ideas. So then they have a piece of homework, 004, that's listed under artistic development of, or develop artistic ideas. Like, I guess what I'm trying to show you here is that you can jump around. Like, you don't have to go numeric, and I've done that before as well, where it doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Instead, it goes like 1, 2, 4, and then up here is 3, 5, etc. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to go in order. Whatever works for you is a good system. And I'm trying to help you, and I'm trying to convince you that this will save you time. I promise you. The big one reason is that, like, I always had an agenda on the board, whether I'm handwriting it on my whiteboard or putting it on a Google Slides account. It's so much faster to say 054 as opposed to lesson 2.1 homework. The students can more easily see that, right? So just visually, okay? Another thing that you could do is that students can find it more easily on Classroom. So like, rather than saying lesson 2.1, like that, they could be looking for a little bit, but if you just say 054, they've found it, right? There's going to be less confusion on behalf of students. The other thing that's kind of nice, which is this is an added benefit, is that you could easily share things with another classroom teacher if they're in your classroom, like if they're like a co-teacher. So it's much easier to communicate with teachers. So like I could say something like, oh, I used 00 or 011 with my class and it went really well. Like just saying that, then the teacher can easily find it on my Classroom. As opposed to like, oh, I use the conflict paragraph graphic organizer. Okay, so it's a full name there. With my class, it went really well. It's in the topic, so now I have to list topic. It's in week 4, and then I have to like somehow list like what third one down, something like that. So the communication in general is way more verbose or way more extensive. It's much more concise and to the point to say to use those numbers. So it's nice. It saves you time, and I promise you, And this is something that I had gotten into. You don't have to, so if you're like, Liz, shut up, I don't even care, you could stop now. But like, I loved using emojis because for those visual learners, they could see what was going on or what the theme was for this assignment. So this might not be as relevant for some like more linear patterns, like more linear courses, perhaps math, perhaps world history. However, like in a class where there was multiple things going on at a single time, like in a project-based learning, like I used emojis. So you could see this was the last year that I had in my classroom. So if it was a reflection assignment, they had this little emoji with a what is that, monocle. So like I just chose that, whatever. So like if a student saw this monocle, they knew that it was a self-reflection that they had to complete. That self-reflection, that was a consistent assignment that was coming up multiple times. We were also in the midst of a research paper. So anytime an assignment had to do with the research paper, I always used that magnifying glass. At the same time of the research paper, we were also working on a compare and contrast. They had just finished up a compare and contrast essay on a book that we read. Anything that had to do only with the book, I used the dove emoji. The book was called Hope in the Unseen. Super awesome book. But so there were sometimes I just used the dove emoji just for like reading assignments or quizzes or things like that. Anything that was specific to compare and contrast essay writing, I use these little scales, compare and contrast. And then anytime that those two units were combined, I put them together. So students, students didn't even need to read sometimes the assignment description to know like, oh, okay, yeah, I know what that's about. So not for everybody. You do what you want to do. The thing with these numbers that I'm talking about, and how you're numbering your assignments and your materials, they work really well with the due dates video that I used or that I sent out earlier. So remember, I talked about how due dates associated with assignments are really important so that they show up on students' schedule on Google Classroom. And so if you see a student can see this on their Google Classroom and say like, oh, 026, I know what I need to do. Now, a student could click on this. Not all students do. So like, it's just a matter of like, oh, 026. They don't have to remember what this whole thing is. Sometimes they go, like, it's just minimize that likelihood of error for them. And I'm not going to pretend like this is the best thing that's ever happened and there's never going to be any problems with organization with students. Like, that's not what this is. However, I'm of the belief that we're trying to support students in developing organizational strategies, and I should really, really try and model good organizational skills, right? Like, if I want my students to be organized, if I want them to be able to find things, then I should be able to demonstrate how do you do that. And it's going to be easier for you. Like if a kid emails you, what's the homework? I mean, you could ignore it and then have to deal with that the next day. Or you could just email them back and say 054, boom, done, right? Or like have that on the agenda. Like it's just easier for everybody. Also, you don't have to describe things to people like, oh, it's under this, it's found here, etc., etc., etc. And some of you may not have this issue at all. Some of you were like, everything works fine within my classroom. Now, I would say it was working fine for me, but my students communicated to me. When I asked them every semester, how did the organization of Google Classroom work, that it was always good to get feedback from my students, and this is something that they said was consistently a benefit to them. Like it was working just fine before, but this helped them be able to spend their time on their learning as opposed to finding the materials. So that's all I've got for you today, and I hope this is a benefit, and I hope this makes your life and your students' life easier.